It is uncanny how right he was. In Aldous Huxley's 1931 sci-fi book, Brave New World, he predicts a lot about modern life in the West. He didn't get everything right, but the stuff he got right is unsettling. How so? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. Welcome to the Philosopher's Bookshelf, where we consider a book from a philosopher's perspective. When I was younger, I was all about the party. I wanted to go out and I wanted to have fun with my friends. I wanted to meet chicks. I wanted to drink. I wanted to just have a blast. It was all a life of pleasure. And I remember at the time, this is a little laughable now, but I thought, I'm going to always live like this, right? I'm gonna be like this forever. I'm gonna always lift and look good and always dress expensive clothes, and girls are always gonna dig me, and it's just gonna be a life party. That's what I thought. And then I started to get a little older, and it started to get harder to live that life. It started to seem absurd. It started to seem like, what am I doing here? It is exhausting. It is, I just don't have the energy for it. And I started to, show signs of age. I started a family, right? I fell in love with somebody, got married, and had kids. And those kinds of things just didn't seem important anymore. It's just, I don't have the energy for it in the first place. So it seemed to me at first that is exactly what life was all about. But then I started to realize that kind of pleasure is fleeting. I can't hold on to it. And what's interesting is I'm not the first person to figure that out. That has been something that people have noticed for generations, for millennia. People have talked about the foolishness of youth and the wisdom of old age. The fact that in our youth, it seems like we're so focused on making ourselves happy with all these different pleasures. And then, we realize that we just can't hold on anymore. And we realize, just like I realized, that the party just can't last forever. Or can it? There is a lot of new technology that possibly could solve some of these issues. Technology that can make us look younger for longer, possibly, to the very end. I don't know. There are things that could rejuvenate us in ways. What if we could live our lives in that same party state all the way up to our very end, to the last day? What if the party would never end? Is that something that we would want? Is that something we should pursue? What would be the repercussions? Those are the questions that are asked in Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. This is a work of science fiction that imagines a possible, Huxley even would say probable way that things could go, especially in the West. And it has an interesting premise. Imagine that there are some people who have a goal of creating global stability through controlling everybody, but the way that they control everybody is by giving them everything they want. They provide a society that maximizes pleasure and minimizes any kind of discomfort or pain. Why would that control people? Well, think about it. A person that's comfortable is a person that's controllable. A person that's fat, dumb, and happy is not starting a revolution. Now, of course, you may wonder, why is this a problem, right? You're going to control me by giving me everything that I want? Sign me up, right? Control me. The problem is, the things that we find most important in life are also things that tend to bring some kind of discomfort or pain with them just necessarily. So, for example, love, sex, God, nature, truth, beauty, ambition, art, old age, death, science. All of these things are things that we'll act unstable for, things we'll even die for, things we may even kill for. And if the goal is to control us, then instability is a bad thing. Interestingly enough, these are also the things that cause us to philosophize. They are things that shock us out of our everyday world of work. They're things that force us to look into, the infinite and to realize that we are not in control. They are things that put us into a state of wonder, and the state of wonder is the beginning of philosophy. Now, the interesting thing about philosophers is that they ask big questions. What should our ambitions be? Why do we feel like sex is something just animalistic and yet also something sacred? How should we live knowing that we will one day die? Is there a God? The man or woman that asks these kinds of questions is not a person that just goes with the flow. So this is not a person that is conducive to stability. So these are bad things because number one, they cause some kind of passion in us. And very passionate people are hard to control. And number two, they cause us to philosophize. And philosophers are hard to control. But how do you control for these kinds of things? Well, this is where things get interesting in the book. There are three major things that they do in this society to control people thinking about these things or even experiencing these things. Number one, all fetuses are grown in a laboratory where they are genetically and developmentally manipulated so they will best suit their eventual place in life. Whether you're going to be a director or an elevator operator, they choose the sperm and egg that best matches what they want you to do. Then your gestation is manipulated so you either develop richly or they stunt your growth. Babies and toddlers are given a Pavlovian style training where they are taught to love the things that they will eventually be forced to do. So for example, if you were going to be a laborer, you would be given a book, as a little baby, and then an electric shock would go through you and you would just associate that pain with the book and you would not want to read any books as you grew older. Throughout your life, you are constantly being trained what Huxley calls hypnopedically. While you're sleeping, there's a voice that's repeating things over and over again, like everybody's healthy and happy. Boy, I sure like these things that my caste does. I don't like these things that caste does. All of these things just to make it so that whatever station in life you are in, you will be happy, you will be satisfied in that station. Kind of a weird idea, right? They're going to force you to be happy with your station in life, but isn't that what you would want? I don't know. Number two, they profane the sacred. Sex is to be shared with anybody and everybody that you find physically attractive, and it's considered antisocial to save it for one person. They have a motto that says, everybody belongs to everybody else. Death is trivialized by doping up the dying people and having children play around them. Relationships are all superficial. Families are considered taboo, even smut. Again, there's no marriage because everybody belongs to everybody else, and there's no mothers and fathers because everything's grown in a laboratory. Church is a place where you go to a room, do drugs, and have an orgy. In other words, there's nothing profound. There's nothing deep. Everything is just like an animal level. Number three, they distract you with pleasure. People are taught to hate solitude. And it's interesting because that's typically where you do your most thinking about life. Entertainment is always present. You always have some kind of screen on. People are always shopping. In fact, there's a phrase that they say, ending is better than mending. In other words, don't fix what you've got, throw it out and buy a new thing. And they even stigmatize it. They say, the more stitches, the less riches. In other words, if you fix something rather than just buy a new one, then we're going to look down upon you like you're poor or something. And as a last recourse, if you're not totally satisfied, there's always Soma. Soma is a drug with no hangover. They consider it the perfect drug. It's something that you take if you ever feel any kind of not good feelings. Before I say what I'm about to say, I want to start off by telling you that I'm not here to judge you, okay? I've done enough bad things in my life that I have no room to judge anyone. But I do think these ideas are interesting, and possibly we do have some real threats here, so they're worth considering. What makes this book so fascinating is that there are some troubling similarities with modern society. Since Huxley's time, we've had a sexual revolution. I remember in the 90s watching the movie American Pie, and there is a scene in there where a girl tells another girl who's kind of nervous about her first time having sex, it's just sex. But that is exactly the attitude that Huxley's talking about. Ridicule the sacredness out of sex. If someone thinks that it might be something more important than just rubbing up against somebody, make them feel little, make them feel like childish. Also, love seems a lot more superficial. Right now, in the West, the divorce rate is astronomical. Over 50%. That's incredible. We're no longer married for better or for worse. We're married until we're no longer happy. And just the idea that the whole point of being married is to make you happy is antithetical to the unconditional love that marriage was supposed to be built on. Also, we make every effort to stave off death or any thought of death. We have all kinds of new medical technologies that will make you look younger. I was talking to somebody recently, Luis, what's up, man? And he mentioned that he was talking to someone who had clearly had some facial work done, and she was definitely in her 50s or 60s, but it was really good facial work. And that was almost worse than having bad facial work because it was sort of like surreal. Like, I'm talking to you, I know you're older, but you just don't look it. You look, it looks weird, right? To be young looking and I know you're old. When people are too old, we put them in assisted living facilities or old folks' homes. I'm not saying I know there's some people that, that need extra help, but at the same time, that kind of pushes these old people out of our everyday experience. Finally, and I'm not sure what it's like where you live, but in Orange County, at least where I live, when they die, we hide their graves. I know one graveyard in all of Orange County, and it's a hidden one, right? It's one that's not close to me. It's like kind of far back, and you just have to know where it is. That's weird, right? In the South, in the United States, I remember driving through there once on my way. I went to Montgomery, Alabama, for a training once, and I was really shocked by the fact that the graveyards are right off the main strips. You see them every single day. But in Orange County, we don't see them anywhere, so we're never thinking about old people or dead people. Another similarity is the shopping aspect, right? How often do we get distracted by shopping? In fact, Huxley never would have thought that we'd be able to shop with our thumbs. How crazy would that have been to a guy in the 1930s? The next reason, I'm not quite so sure how close it is to Huxley's, but in the United States, at least, we're legalizing marijuana everywhere. Again, I'm not here to judge people, all right? That's not my point. But there are some ways that you can see that it's similar to Soma. And here's what I mean. I remember in high school, there were guys that they would smoke so much, they would say they smoke whenever they were stressed out. But that's very similar to this idea here, right? It's like, whenever you feel some kind of stress or pain or uncomfortableness, you smoke a bowl. And imagine if that became not only acceptable, but like wisdom, common practice. Whenever you feel stressed, smoke a bowl. Well, it would be very similar to this book, right? You wouldn't be the kind of person that deals with those things. You're the kind of person that smokes it away. And finally, our levels of distraction are beyond anything Huxley could have imagined. We carry around our distractions in our pockets. Any moment we might feel alone, any chance for solitude, any chance where we might have deep thoughts. It's uncomfortable, right? It's hard to have deep thoughts. So, of course, you pull out your phone and check Instagram. Again, not here to judge, but just to consider. And into this world that Huxley has created, he drops 3 characters. One who is substandard, ugly and small, and therefore gets ridiculed and therefore has to endure suffering. Another who is way above standard, so he can't be distracted enough to stop the thinking, to stop the philosophizing. And one who is raised in the old ways of religion and art and self-restraint. And what's interesting is they call him the savage. This book is an evaluation of what such a society would be like. It's a question, really. Should pleasure be our greatest good? And towards the end of the book, the savage and one of the world controllers have a debate about the merits and the detriments of just such a society. And what's interesting is the controller has some good arguments. Number 1, it's stable. No more wars because everybody's just euphoric. Number 2, it's comfortable. Do you want to be uncomfortable? No, we avoid uncomfort. So why would you want to avoid this world? Number 3, we spend a lot of time trying to achieve this state. It seems backwards to say that we don't want, you're giving it to me too easily. So those are the controller's arguments for this state, and they seem to be pretty strong arguments. Here are the savage's objections. Number 1, we lose all those good things that I talked about before. Art, religion, science, truth, beauty, nature, and of course, philosophy. Number 2, there's no glory in it. It almost seems ignoble. There's no such thing as a hero without some kind of strife. And here's what really struck me. In the book, the people of the lowest caste, the people that are kind of dumb, since they have been conditioned and manipulated so that they will enjoy their status, they are actually just as happy as the people of the higher caste. There seems something weird about that, right? In fact, some of the characters even argue about that. One girl, Elena, says, I would hate to be one of those lower castes. And her friend says, yeah, but if you were that lower caste, you would be happy just like you're happy right now. This seems weird, right? Like, this state of life is just as good as this state of life? The controller's response to this is, hey, it ain't sexy, but it's comfortable. Sure, there's no glory in this, but it is a state that is pleasant. And why not be pleasant if you can? Number 3, there's no freedom here. Freedom is painful. it's hard to choose, even when there are good things to choose. I mean, recently I had to choose between two jobs that I loved, two jobs, teaching in two different places that I just thought were awesome places. Um, it literally gave me anxiety because I was sitting there thinking about, oh my gosh, there are these great things about both of them. How do I choose? How weird, right? Like, I'm choosing between two great things and it actually brings me pain. Number four, the Savage argues that if God exists or if there's some other way for us to get meaning in this life, then this life of pleasure is making us miss that purpose. Imagine God exists. Imagine that he's creating us out of nothing. Well, he probably has some purpose in his mind, right? He's creating it with some kind of thoughts. Now, that means that as he is creating us, as he is enduing us with existence, that we are being created with that very purpose, just as a matter of course, part of our existence. So whatever his purpose is, it's ingrained into our being. Not achieving that purpose means that we haven't had a successful life. But in this society, people are so distracted with pleasure that they never have the chance to even think about God. This is one of the reasons why the author C.S. Lewis says, who by the way was died the same day Aldous Huxley did, which is weird. He says that God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to this world. It gets our attention to what really matters. And if all we had were pleasure, then we might miss that. The Savage argues for number 5 that this life doesn't cost enough. And this is an interesting one. In philosophy of religion, one of the biggest questions is, why would a good God allow evil and suffering? One possibility is what's called character development. Eleanor Stumpf, who is a fantastic philosopher, I had the pleasure of seeing her once debate live. She argues that, psychologists are universal in agreement that suffering brings happiness. Why? Because it makes you grow as a person. You go through suffering and you look at the person that you've become and you're happy with that person. Now that brings up an interesting question that a student of mine once asked me. And in fact, I'd been thinking of it beforehand. So I was really I was stoked that he asked, because I was like, oh man, that was a good question. Why wouldn't God just make us those strong and grown people just to begin with? Why not start off with the character and just skip the character development? And I think one possible reason is because he allows us to earn it. And here's what I mean. I once had a full year of just major anxiety attacks. I still get them sometimes. And it was brutal and grueling. And I remember, I never would have thought this, by the way, while I was going through this kind of, was suffering. But when I look back on it, I think I'm almost glad that I went. In fact, I am glad that I went through those things. I got through them. I've learned how to control my emotions and learned how to, control that kind of fear that came. And that made me, kind of a stronger person. I'm kind of proud of that. Now, God could have made me already strong. And again, in the midst of that first year, I would have wanted him to. But, that was a hard fought victory on my part. And I got to say, I'm glad God didn't deprive me of it. And I think that's the point that the Savage is making here. When you get everything so easily, you didn't earn any of it. Sure, you got the goal, but part of it is that, pride and I did this, I accomplished this. That's awesome. One final objection I think that Huxley is making, and kind of comes a little bit later and is a little bit hidden. The 3 main characters in the end are being split up. They're leaving each other. And Huxley says that they are happy because of their sadness, and they're sad because they love each other. But this is a different kind of happiness than we've seen so far. So far, the word happy has always been used to talk about pleasure. But as Huxley narrates this, he says that they are happy because they love each other, and their love is so great that it actually makes them sad. So one final possible objection here is that the happiness this society is pursuing is not true happiness. Maybe happiness is something that would lead to some kind of sadness. Maybe true happiness must be bought with a price. Of course, that's easy for me to say sitting in this chair, very comfortable, right? Let me know what you think. Would you prefer to have that society that was just totally built on pleasure? Would you give up your freedom to be content? Is it immoral to force other people to be happy? Is it immoral not to force them to be happy? Also, if you know anybody who might be interested in this conversation, please tag them in the comments. That's all I got for today. Adios.